Hey guys, Stephen Cox here, and today I thought it would be cool to talk about all the different chord shapes I use. So if you like videos like these, please check it out, give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing. But basically, when I say chord shapes, mostly here, I've already covered in other videos arpeggios where you play the notes one at a time, and that's more useful to most bass players. But today I'm just going to talk about some different patterns that you can use. Hopefully you can hear me. I just realized how far away the mic was. Let me know how the sound is, by the way, guys. If you would, that would help me out. All right. Now the mic's a little bit closer. Does that help a little bit? But basically for chord shapes and things that I use in arrangements, I might use them just to kind of be able to play certain songs. If I want to be a guitar player, I could use them for that as well. But we'll cover why I use these particular chord shapes a lot, and which ones I probably use most commonly, and why I use some in certain situations but not in other situations. So also let me know if you're here in the chat. I'm going to pull this up on my phone so that I can make sure that it's not just the computer not displaying the chat again. So say something if you're here. And let's go ahead and see. All right. So I'll go ahead and get started and jump in. But basically, you have a whole bunch of different kinds of chords. So you have major chords, minor chords. You have all the different types of seventh chords. You have diminished chords. All right. Hey, Robert, how's it going? I think, yeah, once again, it's only displaying the chat on here. It's not displaying it on my computer. That's what I was afraid of. Okay. So major chords, minor chords, seventh chords. There are certain ones that I like doing in inversions. Sometimes I use two-note chords where it's just like a root and a third, or sometimes a root and a fifth. And sometimes I'll invert those as well. And I use those basically to come up with like harmonized melody parts or things of that nature for the two-note chords. And so there's just a whole lot of different things that we can do with them. All right. Hey, Navix. Hey, Eric. Or Enoch. Sorry, I can't read from that far away. So here we go. So I like using, let's just start with major chords. I like doing a lot of different three-note chords. And there are multiple ways to play them as well. So let's just start with a major chord. So since I said A, we'll start with A major, right? So you can play it like that. You can play a different version like that. But usually you'd have a root, a third, and a fifth in the chord. So if you're used to playing the root, the third, and the fifth as an arpeggio, you're going to realize a problem with this really quick. And that's that the third and the fifth are on the same string. So you can't really play those two notes at the same time just using those shapes that we're used to when we're just playing one note at a time. So what we want to do differently is we might use the 5-fret rule to get a note to a different string. If we wanted to, we could do an inversion where we take one of the notes down an octave. And then there's other times where you can omit certain notes to make the chord work. So let's take an example. We have an A, a C sharp, and an E. So how can we do that where we have them on all different strings? Well, one way is we could move one of them up or down an octave, right? So if you have an A and a C sharp here, we need this E. We can take that E down the octave, and then we have an inversion of an A. So that's one example of an A chord. Try to show you what I'm doing. 7th fret on the A string. You could also do an open A string, but that's a different story. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then 7th fret on the D string and 6th fret on the G string. So I'm using my middle finger to get that first 7th fret. My ring finger is underneath on the D string 7th fret. My pointer finger is getting the 6th fret. And then you can just play those 3 strings. So with the A chord specifically, I might use that one a lot. And the reason I might use those particular notes is because they're high enough on the neck to not sound muddy. So like, for instance, if I were to play an A, a C sharp, and an E down here, it sounds like mud. So if I'm in an upper octave there, the A and the C sharp, and then just get the E that other way. Sorry, I flipped my fingers over. Then that's one thing that I would use. Another thing that we could do, we'll play on the simple side, is we could omit the fifth of the chord. So that's leaving out the E. So basically, when you just have an A and a C sharp, that tells you that it's major because it's a major third interval. So A to C sharp. And if there's nothing else telling us anything different, that's really enough to know what chord we're implying there. So like, let's say you're, let me kind of explain that better. The A tells you what chord we're playing. So we know we're playing an A chord, right? And then the C sharp tells you that it's a major chord because that's a major third. The fifth doesn't really tell you much anything. One thing the fifth would tell you is that it's a triad, meaning it has 3 notes within it, right? So sometimes I'll use that 2-note version of the chord where I just play the root and the third. And then that way I don't need the fifth there muddying the sound up, and it sounds good. Another thing I might do on this one in particular, we could do the open A string. I might double the A note and then play that C sharp. That way I have a low note represented as well as the high notes. If you don't have an open string handy because we're playing a different note that doesn't have an open string, so it's not an E, an A, or D, or G, then you could also play the A down the octave, the A up the octave, and then the major third above that. So what I'm saying here would be like 5th fret on the E string, 7th fret on the D string, and 6th fret on the G string. And right now I'm using my pointer, my ring finger, and my pointer finger and my ring finger to play those A notes. And then that C sharp note, that major third, I'm using my middle finger to get that. Yeah. 5th fret on the E string, 5th fret on the D string, 4th fret on the G string. And the cool thing about this is you can move this pattern around. Right? And really with these chord patterns, because of the way the bass is tuned, the finger patterns can be moved around. So if I start on a G, and I play an octave up of a G, which you know our octave pattern is going up 2 frets and over 2 strings thinner. So we got the octave, and then I can do the major third up from there. So if you just take this note right here, a major third would be like you subtract a fret, but then you go to 1 thinner string. So then the way we have a bass note represented as well as the chord up higher. And it's not super muddy because we're leaving the 5th. If I added the 5th in there, I could, based on that first shape that we did. This is like a guitar major chord. It starts looking like a bar chord, but you don't have to bar them. So our pointer finger is really only responsible for 1 string, so you don't have to bar anything at all. But let's go back to the A example. We have an A here. We can go up a 5th, which is going over 2 frets and up 1 string. Sorry, to 1 string thinner, up in pitch, but to 1 string thinner. And then we can put our pinky underneath that to get the octave that we had before. A here, an E note, then an A note underneath it. And then we can get the third on the G string, which is the 6th fret. So 5th fret, 7th fret, 7th fret, 6th fret. Sorry, 5th fret. I'm not sure if I said 5th fret for the first one. 5th, 7th, 7th, 6th. Now let's try that down. Just move that whole pattern down 2 frets. It's not sounding that muddy here, but usually having that note makes everything just kind of clash a little bit more. So hopefully that's working fine. Oh man, it's doing the pixelated thing again. Sorry, guys. Oh, congratulations on the upright, Novix. Okay, well that makes it harder to see these things. So hopefully it'll just work a little bit better here. Okay. So Seth's talking about 2-finger chords versus 3-finger chords. Okay, very cool. So that being said, we said that we can do a root and a third and leave out the 5th. So an A and a C sharp, but leaving out that E note. Well, instead of playing, if you wanted to stay in the vein of 2-finger chords, instead of playing the 7th fret on the D string and the 6th fret on the G string, we could take the A note down the octave and just have 2 notes being played. So 5th fret on the E string, that's our A note, by the way, and then the 6th fret on the G string. So that's a major chord, and this is what this interval is known as a 10th. And basically that's like a third spread out over an octave. So I have a video on tenths where we kind of walk up the major scale doing that. This one in particular is a major 10th. So basically what we do for that is we have a, let's say we have a note on the E string, then we go all the way to the G string and we just go up 1 fret from that note. So 5th fret on the E string, 6th fret on the G string. So if I want to do other major chords like this, it's basically just where this note is down here on the E string is going to be the root of the chord, and then whatever note is 1 fret up from there on the G string is going to be your third, your major third specifically. So that's one way you can simplify a major chord and have it not sound very muddy and be able to move it all around. So in other words, this is F major, F sharp major, G major, G sharp major, A major, A sharp or B flat major, whatever you want, and then B major, so forth. So it just depends on where your E string note is. And just there, I was making it easier to see with my pointer finger and my middle finger. A lot of times I like using my middle finger and my pinky just because that's a more comfortable stretch on the hand. Okay, so now that we have that, there's one other kind of major chord shape that I want to show you that didn't really work that well with A unless we do it way up high. So we're going to do it up here. We don't have to do all these based off of A, but since I've chosen this, we'll just kind of keep it going. So this one's pretty good for starting on the A string. But basically when you do like your arpeggio, root, third, 5th, like I said, the 3rd and the 5th are on the same string, so we can't play those at the same time in this pattern. So what I do is I take the 5th and I subtract 5 frets from it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I move it to 1 thinner string. That way it's on a different string than the other 2 notes. So this example here, I'm using the 12th fret on the A string for my root. Then for the major third, I'm just going backwards 1 fret and 1 thinner string, which would end up being the 11th fret on the D string. And then I'm going from there back 2 frets, or you can think about the whole subtraction thing I told you to find this, but you can also just look at the shape. So it ends up looking like a staircase. You go back 2 frets and to 1 thinner string. So it's like a staircase with a tiny little gap of an empty fret in between the pointer and the middle finger. So some people might use pinky, ring, and index finger there. But to me, that's harder to get into position. So I just opt for this spread out thing between the pointer finger and the middle finger. I don't like to use this one as much because of that spreadness and just that it puts a lot of tension on the hand. So that example, that A major major is just the 12th fret on the A string, the 11th fret on the D string, and then the 8th fret on the G string. So you just think about the spacing between those fingers, and then where your ring finger is or where your A string note is, if you move this around, wherever that finger lands or that A string note is going to be the name of the chord. So that was A major. If we scoot everything down 1 fret, we've got A flat major. 1 more fret, we go to G major, G flat major, and so forth. So that's pretty good, I think, for our major chord shapes, our major triad shapes. So we'll just kind of stick there, just our straight up major chord. Okay. Looks like everything's still pixelated. I'm starting to get a little annoyed by this, but I apologize, guys. Okay. So Enoch says, trying this on electric bass, larger does not make it easier. No, it definitely makes it harder. There are certain ones where your hands might be crammed close together that would be easier on electric bass, but some of these certainly depend, or some of these are a little bit harder on electric bass, is what I'm trying to say. The tenths aren't too bad. There's like an upright too. But yeah, so the 2-note chords where you're on the 3rd fret on the E string and the 4th fret on the G string, those aren't too bad on electric. So now it says staircase, interesting way to put it. Staircase to heaven. Yeah. So that is a good good way to put it. But once again, hopefully you guys can see. I know that I'm not sure if it's my internet connection or what, but in fact, probably me reading the comments is lowering the quality. So I'll just turn the phone off for now and check in with you guys in a little bit. Okay, so now let's talk about what we would do if it was minor chords. So minor chords are a little bit different. We're going to use a lot of the same ideas to get the shapes. It's just the 3rd of the chord. So in this case, you know how you're doing like A, C sharp, and E for an A major chord? Well, if we lower the 3rd, which means 1 fret down from where it was, instead of a C sharp, we'd end up with a C note, right? So we'd have A, C, E. A, C, E. So in other words, from our major 3rd, we had this shape, to our minor 3rd, we'd be leaving an empty fret in between. So an example for A minor, 7th fret on the D string, 5th fret on the G string. Okay, and then the E would stay the same. Same rules apply. If we wanted to, we could omit that E. But that's just kind of an idea. So let's do the same shapes that we did for the major chord, but then just subtract a fret from wherever the 3rd of the chord lies. If you don't understand what I'm saying by the 3rd of the chord, 5th of the chord, so forth, these are scale degrees, which means if you're playing the A major scale, the 3rd is going to be the 3rd note of the A major scale. The 3rd of the A minor chord would be the 3rd of the minor scale, 3rd note. So like if you were going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, then it would be A, C. So the 3rd would be the C. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. So I'll just keep this in examples using A so that we have the idea. So the first thing that we did was we did an A, a root 3rd, and then we realized we couldn't use the 5th there. So we took the 5th, which is that E note, down the octave. So we'll do the same thing here. So instead of playing the 9th fret on the G string for that E note, we'll bring it down 1 octave and play the 7th fret on the A string. Then we'll go underneath that 7th fret on the D string. And then our C note, our 3rd, will still be the 5th fret on the G string. Right? So that's our inversion, where we have the 5th of the chord down lower than the rest of the chord. So that's cool. It's just we don't always necessarily want that note as the lowest note. So we've got the other option. We could do the 2-note chord version, which is just 7th fret on the D string with 5th fret on the G string. So this finger's hovering, in case you're wondering about the middle finger. I'm not doing anything with it. So I've got the 5th fret I usually play with the ring finger. Sorry, the 7th fret on the D string I'm playing with the ring finger. And then the 5th fret on the G string I'm playing with my pointer finger. So that's a minor 3rd, right? From A to C. So that we don't really need the 5th in that chord because, for instance, the way the chord's named, we know that it's an A chord, something that's built off of an A. And then we know that it's minor because that 3rd is a minor 3rd away from that A. So hopefully that helps a little bit. So if we add the 5th in, that's great, but we don't need it. We could just do those 2 notes, and that implies the chord. So in the same way that we did with the A chord before, we could throw the open A string on there and double those notes. Okay, so that's open A string, 7th fret on the D string, with the 5th fret on the G string. Okay, so if we leave out that open string, just do these two note things, just wherever your ring finger ends up is the name of the chord. So right now, 7th fret on the D string is an A note, so that means that's A minor. But if I put my ring finger on the 5th fret on the D string, and then did the same shape where I'm just backwards 2 frets to 1 string thinner, that's G minor. And if I started up here, 12th fret, that's D minor. So wherever that ring finger lands, that's what we know there. That's what we name our chord. Sorry, that's the root of the chord. Okay, so it's important with these shapes to know where the root of the chord is, so that if you're looking at a chord chart or something and you're trying to figure out which of these shapes to use, you can kind of figure that out based on which finger is kind of going there. And so the reason this is kind of important to do these different shapes is sometimes it might be easier to get to the root of the next chord by doing one particular shape and then moving from there to another chord. It might be less of a jump on the bass. So rather than saying, oh, I want to go from G to C, and you're like, you might want to do the chord here, but a C chord that's more like this, you know, to get the to not have to jump your hand all the way up the neck. So there are reasons to use different ones, and I use these in arrangements sometimes based on what the melody note is. So sometimes I want the 3rd up here because that'll be the melody note. Sometimes I want the 5th up here. That being said, there was one that I left out on the major chords, which will do a shape with the minor as well, and the idea of omitting the 5th. So like, instead of doing this, we could do this. So if we had an A, a C sharp, we decided not to play an E at all, we could put another A note an octave up from the low A note here. So this is a major chord shape, by the way. So, and then I'll tell you the minor equivalent right after. So basically, we just play an A, we go backwards 1 fret to 1 string thinner, and then we just put our octave on top. So if this is our A note, we go 12th fret on the A string is our A note, so we just go up 2 frets and 2 strings thinner. Then we play all those at the same time. And so I might use that shape instead of one of the other shapes if I'm writing an arrangement and the melody note happens to start on the root of the chord. Whereas I might use one of these other shapes if the 3rd of the chord is the melody note. So in the sense of A, if A is the melody note, I might do that kind of thing. And if C sharp is the highest note, I might do this kind of shape or this kind of shape that we went over earlier. Oops. So the minor version, you just subtract the 1 fret from wherever the 3rd of the chord is. So in the case of A major, the 3rd of the chord is the C sharp note. So if we're doing this pattern for A major, we have the 12th fret on the A string, 11th fret on the D string, and the 14th fret on the G string. That version I just showed you guys. Well, our 11th fret on the D string is our C sharp. So if we wanted to make that minor, we could just slide our pointer finger over to the 10th fret. Leave the other 2 notes the same. So that's an A minor shape. It's a little bit more of a stretch. 12th fret on the A string, 10th fret on the D string, and 14th fret on the G string. So it's important to look at the geometry of this. I'm going to get my pinky out of the way. Don't put your don't put your ring finger underneath like this, but I'm just doing it to show you guys that it's not being used. You can just let it hang up here, you know. But if you look at this shape, note there for the minor chord, there's a fret empty in between pointer and the middle finger. There's an empty fret that it's not being pushed down on, and there's also an empty one between the middle finger and the pinky. So just notice that's the way you can tell if that's minor. Whereas if you had it like this, you could tell if that's major because these two are 1 fret apart rather than 2 frets apart. So you really want to look at the geometry of these shapes so that way if you see me playing something in an arrangement or somebody else playing something in an arrangement, you can figure out what the chord is by watching them as well, just by recognizing these shapes. So that's an idea if you watch people who are doing bass solo arrangements and things of that nature. So hopefully that helps a little bit. So that's major and minor. All the same rules apply. Wherever the C sharp is, just subtract 1 fret from it. So here's another example that we had. We have our octave A notes, 5th fret on the E string, 7th fret on the D string. And then this time, rather than using our middle finger to play 1 fret behind, I'm having to bar the 5th fret because our pointer finger is actually getting the G string note and the E string note. So this one's a little bit painful. So I might avoid this one because of the finger pain. But we got 5th fret on the E string, 7th fret on the D string, and 5th fret on the G string. So 5th, 7th, 5th fret. But that's the minor version of that major chord that we did here. Same thing with the 10th. Although with the 10th, since we're only playing 2 notes at a time, here's the major chord. We got an A and a C sharp up here. So we're just going to subtract 1 fret from there. And because we're not having to use other fingers for the 10th shape, then I will just do the 5th fret on the E string and the 5th fret on the G string. So those are just 2 notes stacked. The A is up here, the C is up there for minor. So major 10th, then just subtract 1 fret from there, and then you end up with the same fret on the E string and the G string for a minor chord. Okay, so we've got a lot of different shapes there. I covered a lot of ground. The main thing is kind of just knowing your fretboard will really help you with this. But that's the idea for just simple major and minor chords. All right, let's see if anybody said anything. Yeah, so Seth likes the minor ones. Finally, I get to use chords that I haven't been using for months. Cool. Can you go over sus chords? I can go over sus chords. Basically, remember how I was saying the 3rd of the chord, the 4th of the chord, the 5th of the chord, and so forth? If it says sus, they're generally replacing the 3rd of the chord with the 4th unless they designate a different note. So if it says like A sus or A sus4, then instead of a C sharp note, we're going to play a D note. So let's say you were playing, and let's do the root 3rd and the 5th in this one because that doesn't designate enough on its own to really tell us that it's some sort of A chord and not an inversion of some other chord. So if we had our A, C sharp, and E before, then let's do it this way. We'll do the inversion one. A, C sharp, and then the E down here. All I do is I change the C sharp. I would just go up 1 fret because the next note in the scale, A, B, C, D, is 1 fret above, and that's the 4th note of the scale. So if it's a sus4 or it doesn't have a number after it, we just assume it's a sus4. We're literally replacing the 3rd of the chord with the 4th of the chord. So that's an A sus chord. You could literally just play 5th fret on the A string, 5th fret on the D string, and 5th fret on the G string, knowing that our root's in the middle. That's a little confusing though. So you could also, let's see what else we could do. We could play we could do this. Let's do this version. Remember how we're doing this chord? Where it was 12th fret on the A string, 11th fret on the D string, and then 9th fret on the G string. That's our A, our C sharp, and our E. Well, we could just move that C sharp note up to here. So I might use different fingers to do this now. But that's a good way to get the sus4 chord. So we've got 12th fret on the A string, 12th fret on the D string, and 9th fret on the G string. So that's a cool shape. So these 2 notes are stacked. Then you're literally going, so you got 12th fret on the A string and 12th fret on the D string. I'm using my ring finger and my pinky for this one because it's just odd enough to where I have to do that. And then my pointer finger is getting the 9th fret. So that's 2 empty frets in between for that shape, right? So it's a movable pattern too, but it's just a little bit more uncomfortable. I think that was a little uncomfortable on the hand. That's one way to play it. Like I said before, you can do the octave thing. If you have an A note really low and an A note really high, we probably could omit the fifth, meaning no E note is necessary, and just play a D note over the top, because I think that kind of doubling that A note lets you know that's really the root of the chord. It makes it feel very permanent, and then putting that D note underneath there. So this example would be 5th fret on the E string, 7th fret on the D string, and then underneath it 7th fret on the G string. So pointer finger, ring finger, and pinky underneath. So the ring finger and the pinky are on the same fret on different strings. So that's what I do for a sus4 chord. There's a couple other chords that we haven't mentioned, and that's diminished and augmented chords. So this shape is kind of our go-to for seeing the root, third, and fifth the easiest. So a diminished chord, rather than being a minor third and then a major third, we end up with 2 minor thirds stacked. So this one's just kind of really a pain in the hand to play. I don't suggest trying this pattern on an electric bass unless you're above the 12th fret. You can, it just might hurt a little. And you might need bigger hands, and you might need to have your thumb lower so that you can reach further, that kind of stuff. But let's go with A diminished. So we have our root, our third, and our fifth is a major chord. Then we made it minor by lowering the third of the chord 1 fret. So we end up with A, C, E. And now, I know you can't see that, but we already went over this. So that's the A minor chord. A diminished chord takes the 5th of the chord and also brings it down a fret. So right now I'm playing the 12th fret on the A string, the 10th fret on the D string, and the 8th fret on the G string. So as you can see, it's really painful on the hand, kind of hard to play. So subtracting 1 fret from the 3rd of the chord, and you're subtracting 1 fret from the 5th of the chord. So in this one, it is important to represent all 3 notes, which is why it's just a pain to figure out how to play it decently on the bass. But there is another option. We can do that shape that we were doing here, where we're doing root, 5th, octave, 3rd, which for the major chord would be 5th fret on the E string, 7th fret on the A string, 7th fret on the D string, and 6th fret on the G string. Well, we could lower that 6th fret to the 5th fret by using our pointer finger to bar that note. So that's our minor chord at that point, because we've just lowered the 3rd. And now we just need to lower the 5th, which in this case is the 7th fret on the A string, our E note. So what I'm doing there is, instead of playing my ring finger on the 7th fret, I'm just going to use my middle finger to play the 6th fret. So then you have 5th fret on the E string, 6th fret on the A string, 7th fret on the D string, and then we have our 5th fret on the G string. And if you're like, oh, that's kind of painful, well, we could just do it this way as well. Leave out the low root, since we already have our root represented here, and then with an inversion. So that would be the 6th fret on the A string, the 7th fret on the D string, and the 5th fret on the G string. And just knowing that the root of this chord would be wherever the ring finger is, so whatever the D string note is. So just recognizing these shapes and knowing which finger to look at to figure out what's the root of the chord is kind of the secret there. I don't use diminished chords a lot, so you probably won't either. If you play stuff like Primus, you might, but otherwise you probably won't see too many of those, maybe occasionally in certain songs, but it's a little bit more rare than the major and the minor chords. Okay, and then the rarest of all of these 3-note chords is the augmented chord, and that's because it sounds really bright, really abrupt, kind of. And basically what that is let's just take our major chord, root, third, and fifth, and instead of lowering the fifth and lowering the third, why don't we just leave this third where it is, and then our fifth note of the chord we're going to raise up. So in this example, you have an A note, a C sharp note, and technically you would call this E sharp, but it's the same note as F. So the main thing to look at is just, remember how we were talking about it was like a staircase before, but there was an empty fret between your middle finger and your pointer finger? We're just getting rid of that empty fret by sliding the pointer finger up. So it's actually easier to play. It'd be like 12, 11, 10. 12th fret on the A string, 11th fret on the D string, 10th fret on the G string. But it's a very awkward sounding chord that's used for like a dream sequence kind of thing. So you might not hear this one as often, but root, third, and raised fifth, augmented chord. Okay, so we can do the same thing with all these other with all the other shapes that we just did. It's just kind of annoying on that one, so I think that one's probably the best use. But you can figure it out if you know where your root, your third, and your fifth are on this version of the chord. All you gotta do is raise the fifth. So that seems easy, but you're like, well, how do I get my ring finger to go past my pinky? Well, the answer is get your ring finger to play the note that your pinky was playing and then reach your pinky over. But it's very annoying. I think the best version of that chord is just that B note version that's like a staircase. Okay, so that's an augmented chord. So now we've covered major, minor, what was the other one? So it was a major, minor, diminished, augmented, and sus chords, right? At least sus 4 chords. You might see a sus2. That just means replace the third note of the chord with the second note from whatever scale you're pulling from. So if you had an A sus2, A, B, C, D, E, our second note is a B. So we just have to figure out, what shapes can I use to do that? Well, let's go back to this trusty little shape where we have that empty fret in the middle. Well, instead of the third note of the scale, which is a C sharp, we're going to replace that with a B. So you end up with 12th fret on the A string, 9th fret on the D string, and 9th fret on the G string. So if you have a sus2 or even a sus9, those are two ways to play that on the bass. That's one way to play both of those chords, because the 9th of a chord is the same note as the second, just raised up the octave. I don't feel like it's very convenient to play this way, though. Yeah, it's not that bad if you omit the fifth. If you leave out the fifth of the chord, you can have two A's here and a B note on the G string. So that'd be 5th fret on the E string, 7th fret on the D string, and the 4th fret on the G string. So again, using my middle finger and my pinky to get that octave A note, and my pointer finger is just back 1 fret from there on the G string. Back 1 fret from my E string note. So if my E string's on a 5th fret, then my pointer finger on the G string is going to be on the 4th fret. So that's kind of the thing there. So I mentioned a minute ago that I use some of these chords based on where the melody falls, right? So like, let's say we're playing, I'm going to try to pick a simple song. Trying to think of one that uses major and minor chords. I'm just drawing a blank here. Major and minor chords, but doesn't have too complex of a melody. So I'm thinking like nursery rhyme kinds of things, but I'm thinking of a lot of them just using major chords. So let's say maybe Ode to Joy. I might be able to do something with that. Let's do Ode to Joy in the key of A, just because we've been using the key of A. So it's normally in the key of D. Bear with me here, people with perfect pitch. But if we're playing in A, well, then I know that my melody note starts on the third. So I might use this inversion. So, so I really end up playing an A major chord while the melody note's there. And then if I wanted to play another chord, I could do that sus4, right? Because we're still on a, wait, right? So third, fourth, fifth. I'm just using my free pinky to play the other notes because it's the only finger that's free to play the other melody notes. And then here, it goes to an E chord in this key because it goes to our 5 chord. And so for the 5 chord, I'm playing root 3rd octave because the 5th of that chord is the melody. So far we've got right, and then we go back to an A chord, but the melody's on the 3rd note of the scale. So sorry, it's actually on the root in that case, but I can't just jump that up here. So 2 options that I have is I could just omit the 3rd this time, which I haven't gotten to yet. But there's a chord called a power chord, right, where we just have a root and a 5th. So the problem with the power chord is it doesn't tell us whether the chord's major or minor. But when we're doing arrangements like this, we would know that the A chord would be major. So we could kind of like omit the 3rd in this case because it's just sort of implied from the melody, and then use a power chord, right? So let's see. But actually, a power chord's more like this. I'm going to put the 5th lower. So I'm taking the, so if I have my root in my 5th, A, E, I'm going to take the E down the octave. So I end up with these little stacked notes, an A here and an E there. So that way I don't have a note higher than that hiding the melody note. So the highest pitch note that we have is going to sound like our melody note, and we don't want it in the middle of everything in general, or it's hard to pick that out from the ear which one was supposed to be the melody note. So I might just do 7th fret on the E string, or sorry, 7th fret on the A string and 7th fret on the D string in that case. So far we've got our, here it is from the beginning. Here I'm just going to do the 2-note chord. Okay. Another option that we could do there instead of that is to do an inversion where we put the 3rd of the chord in the bass if we decide, I really do like having the C sharp there. And so what that would be is instead of playing the C sharp as the 4th fret on the G string, I just brought that note down the octave. So I have a C sharp here and an A here. So so you kind of get the idea. If you understand music theory and you understand scales, you can figure out which notes to play. And as you can tell, like, these are common things that I end up doing, but it's kind of just finding them out of necessity. So if I know that I want the melody note to be the highest note, that might change what order I have the other notes in, just for the sake of ease. Other times I might just leave the chord out entirely and just do an octave so that we have an implied bass line instead of implied chord. But that's basically what I'm doing there. So let me check your comments and see what's going on here. All right. So there's a ton of stuff in there, right? So you just got to understand what the chord name tells you, essentially. So in other words, if you're doing a sus4, it's telling you you're basically doing a suspension, but you're playing the 4th note instead of the 3rd note within that chord. If it says A diminished, then you know you're doing root, minor 3rd up from there, and then a flatted 5th on top. So whatever's in your scale, you know, if you're talking about an A major scale, but you're trying to find a diminished chord, you're going to play an A because the root's not going to change because it's an A diminished chord. Then you're going to find the 3rd note of that scale and pull it down 1 fret. And then you're going to find the 5th note of that scale and pull it down 1 fret too, because diminished means both the 3rd and the 5th are flatted. Augmented means root, major 3rd, sharp 5th. So then you just got to know if you have a major chord, just sharp the 5th note of the scale wherever it falls. And the scale that's named like the chord. So like, you know, if you have a B minor chord and pull your root third and fifth from the B minor scale. If you have a D major chord, and this could just happen in any song, then just use the scale to figure out what those other notes are. All right, so Fran says, I got my first bass today. Congratulations on your bass. That is awesome. And then love the sus sound and everything, especially sus 2. Yeah, sus 2 is really nice. It almost reminds me of a Pink Floyd song. I'm trying to remember which one, but yeah, just sus 4 is kind of cool. The other thing is they're called suspensions. In classical music, you would resolve the suspension. So you might do a sus chord, sus 4, going to an A major chord. But in jazz music and pop music, we don't necessarily take those same rules that we would from classical, so a sus chord's not always resolved. Okay. I'm giving you guys a lot of information, a lot of different orders. Just use the stuff you guys understand. Just know that the scale notes, root, third, fifth, is coming. The root is the first note of the scale. The third is the third note from the scale with the same name. So if you don't know scales, I have videos on how to do a major scale and a minor scale that'll help you out. And then that can help you figure out what's going on here. And then memorizing the neck will also help there. Okay, so Navik says, I think the A string is out of tune. The 6th fret sounded like an E instead of E flat. I don't think it's that bad. It might be a little bit off, but I don't think it's quite that far off. It might be a little bit off. It just happens over time, you know. So I will tune up. It seems like all my strings have gone sharp. Looking at the there's a tuner on the amp, so it seems like all of them went a little bit sharp. The other thing is the intonation on most short scale instruments isn't perfect. So sometimes as you go up the neck, things will get sharper or flatter. Oh, Seth, that would have been a great example. Lean on Me. So on that one, I would literally just keep them all in that root position where I'm doing root, third, root. So root, third, and then the octave up from the root. And then, yeah, that minor shape. So you need to know which chords are major and which chords are minor within a certain scale. So in this song, we're in the key of C major. So we'd have a C major chord followed by a D minor chord. So I'm just doing root, third, octave for that as well. And I'm literally just walking uphill that way. So major, major, minor, minor, major. Same one, major, minor, minor, major. And then, so that one's actually technically a 5 chord at that point, so we might change it up based on that. A G chord with a D up here. It's kind of a hard one to get the third in there. So I'd probably just do the octave, and then a 5th way up here. Not worry about it being major or minor because the key sort of implies that. So confusing, but there you go. And then Navik says, ignore my comment. I guess my ear was just being funky. It does not sound out of tune. It might compare to the open strings, you know, but I think if the other notes are on this part of on the neck, then hopefully it's in. But that is an issue with U basses, is that they are a little bit, the intonation is a little bit of an issue with pretty much any short scale bass instrument like this. Maybe if you pay more and get the higher end ones, there's less of an intonation issue, but it's just really, really hard to solve that problem. So, yeah, so that's kind of the thing with intonation. One thing that helps is just making sure, especially if you have the polyurethane strings, that you push down directly and you're not like doing some weird bend. And then you just got to figure out where in the fret the note stays in tune the most. And if your ear is really key on it, you can even push down a little bit harder, which might raise the pitch up slightly if you're flat. But if it's sharp, there's not really a whole bunch you can do about it once you've played the note. So kind of a tricky thing there. So what have we got so far? We got major, We got minor, diminished, augmented, and all sorts of different shapes there. So then we have seventh chords. So seventh chords have like a naming system of their own. Well, it's not really of their own. It's the same idea, right? If we say we're adding the sevenths to the chord that we already have, which is generally what seventh chords are, then you got to take the scale that it goes with, which this is a little trickier with diminished chords. But let's say you're playing a major chord, right? And it's a major seventh chord. Not to be confused with the dominant seventh chord, which we'll talk about later, which if it just says D7 or A7, those are dominant chords. A major 7 chord will have like MAJ or a triangle to show that it's major. And you're like, why a triangle? Don't ask me. That's just what jazz musicians decided to do to shorthand it. I'm not really sure the reason. Somebody maybe has done the research before and could tell me. If you're in the chat and you know, let me know. Otherwise, I have no clue why. But a triangle on a jazz chart represents a major 7th chord. So, so what does that mean in a major 7th chord? Well, if we were taking our chord A major, we have a root, a third, a fifth, and a 7th. So if you're playing the A major scale, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, our first note would be an A, right? Then our third note would be a C sharp. Our fifth would be an E. So that's just the same as the major chord. And then we have to add the 7th note from the scale into that. So that's going to be a G sharp in this case. So you might be looking at this like, that's 4 notes. Like we have 4 strings and we're trying to not be muddy. How do we know what to do? Well, remember before when I said you could omit the 5th of a chord? On the 7th chords, it's not absolutely necessary every time. You could theoretically play root, 3rd, 5th, 7th out of order. So like let's say you did, or actually in order, root. Let's do something on the E string because we need all 4 strings. Root, 3rd, 5th. Then we need our 7th. That's that note. So it's gonna hurt really bad. So don't do this, guys. Yeah, my fingers can't even do it. So obviously we don't want to play it in that order, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th from the E string going up. I might be able to do it up here. No. Okay, don't do it that way. But if you omit the 5th, it makes it a lot easier. And then you could also do inversions if you want to. But for now, let's do root position 7th chords and just a couple different shapes that I play. So if I'm starting on the A string, I like to use root, 3rd, 7th, where I just leave out the 5th note of the scale. So in our example of A major, if we did A major 7, we'd use the 12th fret on the A string, because that's our A note. Then we do the 11th fret on the D string, because that's our 3rd, our major 3rd. And then now we just need a G sharp. So there's a G note, that's the 12th fret down here. So I'm going to sharp that to the 13th fret. So I end up with 12th fret on the A string, 11th fret on the D string, and 13th fret on the G string. And that's an A major chord, A major 7. So remember how before we had it here? Well, how are we doing like root, 3rd, octave? Well, if we just subtract 1 fret from that, we get this pattern, root, 3rd, 7th. So that's our major 7th chord. Okay? So then we talked about a dominant 7th chord briefly. So what is that compared to this? And I'm only going to do, actually, there's one other shape I wanted to do for a major 7th chord. So if we're starting on the A string, that's what we can do. You got that one. What if we wanted to start on the E string? So we'll do 5th fret on the E string, which is an A note. Well, then we'll do the 7th and then the 3rd. We'll change the order of the other 2 notes. So basically, you know how we're doing the octave in the 3rd before? Root, octave, 3rd. So an A note here, an A note on the D string, and then the 3rd. Well, this octave is 1 note away from our major 7, so we're just going to subtract 1 fret from there instead of playing the. So before we were doing the 5th fret on the E string, the 7th fret on the D string, and the 6th fret on the G string. Well, now we're going to subtract 1 fret from here. So instead of playing the 7th fret, we're going to play the 6th fret on the D string as well as the 6th fret on the G string like we were doing before. Now, if you look at this, this looks like my fingers are really cramped together. I don't like that order, so I'm going to flip the fingers around so that instead of my ring finger playing the D string note, my ring finger is going to play the G string note, and my middle finger is going to play, my middle finger is going to play D string note. So you end up with 5th fret on the E string, 6th fret on the D string, and 6th fret on the G string. So notice that the root of the chord on the E string is I'm playing with my pointer finger. Then I'm using my middle finger to play the 7th, not the 7th fret, but the 7th note of the scale, the 7th note, the 7 of the 7 chord, which happens to be the 6th fret here. I know it's confusing. Problem with music is there are all these numbers thrown at you, and you have to know what the person is talking about. Like, well, are you talking about the 3rd of the chord? Are you talking about the 3rd of the overall key we're in? Or are you talking about the 3rd fret? There's a lot of things those numbers can mean. So that can be kind of confusing. Or are you talking about using your 3rd finger on whatever instrument you're doing? Okay. So anyway, in this case, I'm talking about the 7th of the chord, which happens to be the 6th fret on the D string, right? So if you look at this pattern, it's the root of the chord on the E string, then on the D string we'll go up 1 fret, and on the G string we'll have that same fret as the D string. So in this case it's 7, 6, 6 frets, 7th fret, 6th fret, 6th fret for our major 7 chord. Okay, so now we need to talk about the dominant 7th chord. And the reason I do that is it's the least different from the major chord, the major 7th chord. There's only one note that changes. So a dominant 7th chord has the same idea, root, 3rd, and 5th, but we're going to flat the 7th. So root, 3rd, and the 5th don't change. So they're still like the A major things. If you see A7 and there's no maj in between, M-A-J in between it or anything like that, it's just an A followed by a 7. That's actually a dominant 7th chord, which means root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7 from the major scale. So in other words, we're flatting the 7th note of the major scale, so -1 fret. So if we had this before, in this version, our ring finger is playing the 7th note of the scale, which is that G sharp note. So we're just going to flat it by pulling it down 1 fret, and it becomes a G note. So it sounds kind of bluesy. It's the kind of chords that we're pulling our blues bass lines from. So with this one, I'm playing the 12th fret on the A string, the 11th fret on the D string, and the 12th fret on the G string. So the main thing to note about this is that the A string note is the same fret as the G string note. And then the 3rd of the chord, of course, is that note in the middle is just one fret behind, subtract 1 fret from where the other 2 are, and that gives you that C sharp. But the thing to see about it is the shape. These 2 fingers are on the same fret. This one is 1 fret behind the other 2. So the A string note and the G string note are on the same fret, and the D string note is 1 fret behind those other 2 notes. So 12s, 11, 12th fret, 11th fret. So hopefully that made sense. I'm hoping that the picture is coming through clear enough for you guys to see that. I'm not sure why it wouldn't be. Makes me wonder if it's my internet connection or if YouTube changed something, but I'll have to figure that out. But that's our dominant 7th chord. So same thing. Remember how we're doing our major 7th chord in this position, starting on an E? E string, 5th fret. It's the root of our chord. And then we have the 6th fret on the D string and the G string. We already talked about the note that is our 7th in this chord is the D string note. D is in dog. So we're going to subtract 1 fret from that note. And now you're like, that's really uncomfortable too. What can we do to make that more comfortable? For some reason, for me, the most comfortable thing to do, you could just do that, right? Where you do 5th fret on the E string, 5th fret on the D string. That's our 7th of the chord that got flattened. And then the 6th fret on the G string. But for me, I find it more comfortable to use my pinky for that last note rather than my ring finger. Not sure why. It's the same idea. Okay. So that's our dominant 7th chord, the A string way and the E string way. You can just move those shapes around. Here your root is on the E string, here your root is on the A string. So just kind of recognizing those patterns as you go by really helps. Okay, so we got our major, our dominant. We haven't gone over minor yet. So our minor 7th, we know that our 3rd was already flattened because our minor chord, we have that minor 3rd. So an A and a C. C is our minor 3rd. And then we need a 7th. So it's going to be the same flat 7th from the dominant 7th chord. It's also the 7th that's in the minor scale. So if you were to play minor scale, you'd have A, B, C, E, F, G, A. Our 7th note was that G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now we have our root, our 3rd, our 5th, and our 7th. A, C, E, G, just so you know the note names. So once again, we're going to omit that, the 5th. So we're just going to end up with A, C, G. And that tells us everything that we need to know, because the 5th doesn't really tell us anything if we just assume that it's the normal 5th, right? From whatever scale, major or minor, it's the same. The A note tells us that, you know, it's some sort of A chord, right? The 3rd of the chord, the C, tells us if it's major or minor. And then the 7th tells us if it's a 7 chord. So we see A minor 7 or A minus 7 on some jazz charts. Excuse me. Then we know we're doing that. We don't really need the 5th to tell us anything about the chord. Everything that's mentioned in that naming of the chord is given to you by the root, the 3rd, and the 7th. Okay, so we need an A, a C, and a G. It's very similar because, like I said, the root and the 7th are the same. So those are both going to be, if we do the A string version, those are both going to be 12th frets. 12th fret on the A string, and then our 7th is going to be 12th fret on the G string, just like from the dominant 7th chord. But now instead of our C sharp note, we're pulling it backward 1 fret to get that C note. So we've got 12th fret on the A string, 10th fret on the D string, and then 12th fret on the G string. So the important thing about recognizing these patterns is seeing how the fingers are laid out, right? These two have the same fret. So these two have the same fret, and then we're subtracting 2 frets to get that note in the middle, to get the 3rd of the chord. Root, 3rd, 7th, 12th fret, 10th fret, 12th fret. So I gave you a lot of different ways to think about it. If I'm confusing you, then just kind of look at the pattern. Right? 12th fret on the A string, 10th fret on the D string, 12th fret on the G string. So there's a lot of information in this video. You may have to come back to it a couple times. Hopefully it's concise enough for you to find stuff in here. Maybe I'll have to do something to help you guys find it, since there's just so much information in here. So we can take this minor 7 shape down here. It's going to look like this. So the easy way to see this one is just your fingers are stacked. They're all playing the same fret. You could theoretically play it as a bar shape. It's just, as you can tell, it's really hard to bar the D string and the G string at the same time, especially on the metal strings. So I use 3 separate fingers to do it, but that's up to you. So our root of the chord is our A note. We're playing 5th fret on the G, pardon that, 5th fret on the E string. Then we're going to play I'm just going to tell you it's the 5th fret on the D string before I confuse you with more numbers, and the 5th fret on the G string. So it's 5, skip over the A string, 5, 5. So basically, we had all these other shapes, right? Our major 7th shape, and then for our, it was like 5, 6, 6, but our minor 7 shape, just pull both those fingers down 1 fret. And then you've got 5th fret on the E string, 5th fret on the D string, 5th fret on the G string. So that's our minor 7 shape. So we got our root on the E string, our seventh on the D string, and our third on the G string. And those are the scale degrees. Those are the chord tones, I mean. So if we're playing an an A minor 7, we've got the A note. Then we've got the note that gives us our seventh and that name of the chord, which is going to be the G note, which happens to be the 5th fret on the D string. And then we've got the third of the chord is our C note, which is going to be the 5th fret on the G string. So that's a lot of things. I'm trying to tell it to you all the different ways you can think about it. If you're confused by frets versus the scale degrees, don't worry about it. Just look at what the shapes are for the major 7 chord, the minor 7 chord, this, that, and the other, and then disregard that other information for now until you get more theory knowledge about scales under your belt. And then that'll kind of help then. So there is a minor 7 flat 5 chord, which is also known as a half diminished chord. On that one, we need all 4 notes to really know that it's that chord, unfortunately. So given that we have that minor thing going on here, if we really use our dexterity to its fullest, we can reach our pinky up and get the flat 5th, which is going to end up being, instead of an E, it's going to be an E flat note on the A string. So we end up with 5, 6, 5, 5, which is very uncomfortable. And you probably wouldn't want to play it low like that. You'd probably play it up here, right? So, and then playing that with the A string and no E string at all, just like what we were doing before, I kind of shortchange it and just leave out you have to either leave out the third or you have to leave out the flatted fifth to play them all at the same time. So sometimes what I'll do in songs that use that, where I have to do the A string version of it. So I do my minor 7 chord, just like normal. And then if I want flat 5th, I'll play it after I play the other notes. So that way you can hear all those things at the same, not at the same time, but in the same measure. So that one's kind of a weird thing, but typically I try to do that, maybe implying the bass line of the root and the flatted 5th. Just kind of depends on what works, but that one's kind of harder to do. And honestly, it can be so muddy sounding that avoiding it on the bass altogether is probably okay. Just do the root in the third, or pretend like it's a minor 7th chord and let another instrument fill that in. Or if you don't have another instrument, you're doing a solo arrangement, it's just sort of implied. Hopefully people will get that. If not, it'll still sound good because there are no incorrect notes being played, even if not all the correct notes are being played. So hopefully that's helpful. Augmented, you don't really have a 7th chord with augmented, so you're okay. That's the idea there. It's still pixelated, but you can see where your fingers are. Okay, so my secret for trying to get it less pixelated was to stop looking at the chat on the phone so that I'm using less internet. I have a feeling it's an internet issue for me. So I'm trying my best. Okay, so let's see. Now it says, I think they should. Okay, that was from a while ago. Lean on Me. Seth says, you can do the chords to the song Tequila. I feel like I play that song incorrectly all the time. I usually go like bum, 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 but that's not the chords. So, so honestly, I don't know if that one's a good one or not, but it's a fun song to play. I played some version of it at Mexican restaurants before. Did it get more pixelated when I pulled out the phone and started looking at it for the comments? Because I bet it might have. But if you guys have any questions, just leave them below. I'll come back to that and check your questions out. So just let me know. But yeah, you can use all these different things based on if you want the chords to be close together or if you're okay like moving them further up. So if I were doing the 10th thing where I'm just doing the 2-note chords, you could do a whole entire scale like that, which I have a video on this. Right? Especially in G major or below. You can have so like a G major or an F an F major scale or even an E major scale. You just have to know how it works. Basically, with the E major, you just have to treat the open string like it was a fret. So if you were doing a major chord, a major 10th off of the E string, you have the open E string. So we go up 1 fret on the G string from there. Obviously, that sounds a lot like Blackbird, so you can tell kind of the general idea of what he's doing at the beginning of what Paul McCartney's doing on the guitar for Blackbird is like really based off of tenths and having an open note ringing in between. It changes as the song goes forward, but it kind of starts that way. So that's really about all I wanted to cover with chords. We even covered sus chords and diminished and augmented. So it's a pretty full list. We didn't talk about ninth chords. So as far as like ninth chords and anything past there, that number is like, okay, so let's say you haven't. That's kind of confusing. If you start talking about ninth chords, it's going to get a little bit confusing. A lot of times a ninth chord would mean that you're doing. Remember how before we had the sus2 chord? Well, the ninth chord is kind of similar, except we don't omit the third. We just add another note in. So that's kind of weird, kind of hard to play on bass, and I don't worry too much about those. But if I were going to imply one without worrying about all the notes being there, I'd probably just do root, fifth, ninth for a major or a minor ninth chord. So the ninth is going to be the second note of the scale up the octave. So it's like we basically add 7 to a note. So like a root up the octave is 1 plus 7 equals 8, right? So that's the 8. So a ninth would be, you take 2 because it's the second note of the scale. So 2 plus 7 equals 9. So it's basically just the second note of whatever key you're in brought up the octave. So you got to get creative on these voicings, but you get the general idea of what I'm doing there. And when I do arrangements, I'm using this idea. I'm using all these ideas we went over to figure out what inversion I need to do or what shape I need to do to have the melody note played easily while implying the chord or at least a bass note with it. So, and a bass note plus a third implies a chord, right? But yeah, not the most concise list. We could still do ninth chords. We could do 13th chords. We could do 6th chords. But really, all those are self-explanatory based on the name if you understand the theory behind it. And then it's just a matter of figuring out what the best finger shape is and which notes you can omit to make it sound the best. So I guess we could talk about like 6 chords, right? So a 6th chord, you do a root, a third, and a 6th would probably be the easiest way to do it on the bass and just omit the other notes. So if you're doing an A, a major chord, but an A6, then basically that's going to be an A, a C sharp. Instead of an E, we'll replace it with an F sharp because that's the 6th note of the scale. Root, third, 6th. So that might help if you just have questions about that one in particular. But I don't want to cover that one in too much detail. I think the main thing that we wanted to cover is major, minor, the 7th chords, diminished and augmented, and then the sus chord was kind of nice just to add that in there. Anything else, you should probably have a little bit more of a theory background so that you can figure out ways to play it and ways to imply it. But those up to 7th chords, I feel like you can get away with just kind of doing that. So that's really about it. So that would help if you like wanted to play a version, like if you wanted to strum and sing, you could figure out different ways to do these chords in order to be able to strum and sing on the bass. And generally speaking, keeping things above the 5th fret will sound more guitar-like. So, oh, I have my loop pedal plugged in. So if I wanted to play something where I'm doing chords, I keep the chords in kind of the guitar range, right? So in general, I like staying on, can't always get above this E, but if I can, it's better. So I try to not have notes lower than that, so that the bass line can be played underneath it. So let's say I was just kind of up here. So I have an A minor 7 chord shape going to a D7 shape based on what we were talking about earlier. So then I've stayed out of the way so that I have low notes down here, except I'm technically playing a D where I'm going to end up having to play a D over here, but it's not in the way. It's the same note. So I can make a bass line. You know what? I should have started with the backbeat. I'm going to start with the drum beat first, so I have some timing in there. There we go. So now I need to create a bass line of some sort using arpeggios. So that's kind of cool. If it needs any more rhythm, I could add something in now. Okay. And then I could just solo over that. So that's one way, and I'm just using 2 different 7th chord shapes, right? So I had in that one I had an A minor 7, which we talked about already, and then I had a D dominant 7th, which on paper would just look like D followed by the number 7. So we went over both those shapes in here. I did it on an A chord before, but it's the same idea where you have the root of the chord, the 7th of the chord, then the 3rd. So hopefully you can like recognize these shapes in context, right? Root, 3rd, since this one's the one that starts on the A string, so our root's down here. And then this is the one that starts on the E string, so our root's on the E string down here. And then I'm adding elements of finger picking to get, rather than just going, I'm going all of them together, then the low note, and then plucking the higher 2 notes. So that's kind of what I did there. You can do a lot with these chords. You could strum instead. It's just if you strum this one, you have to mute the A string. It's not ringing out. Yeah, so if you have open strings in there, you have to use other fingers to mute those if they're not intended in the song. All right, so let's see. Anybody got any questions based on that? Hopefully it covered something for you. So Seth said that sounds good. Yeah, so that's a really common progression, and in the jazz context, it's a 2-5 progression. In the key of G, we never actually hit a G because G's are 1. But I'm just hitting the 2 chord, going to the 5 chord. So in the key of G, our 2 is an A, and we know that the 2nd chord in our key is going to be minor. And because it's jazzy, I just added the 7th to it. So it's A minor 7th. And our 5 chord is a D chord, because in G, A, B, C, D is the 5th note of the scale. And so that's what I was saying, that numbers can be confusing in music, because there I was talking about the 5 chord based on whatever key we're in. So if we're in the key of G, our 5 chord is built off the 5th note of the scale. But when you're naming the notes within the chord, it's easier to use the scale that's the same as the chord to figure out those different things. So a lot of different things with numbers there. It's a little bit confusing, and you have to really pay attention to which information you're being given. If you're talking to somebody and they're giving you information about a song, it's it's kind of tricky to do that. But a lot of times it's just like the context will make it clear to you if you have a little bit of theory under your belt and you've practiced this kind of stuff. So if you don't know enough theory to even handle what's going on here, I have a beginner playlist that at least covers major scales and minor scales. And so if you learn those scales and then come back here, I think a lot more of this will make sense. And then you should also probably memorize some notes on your fretboard. That might help as well. Seth says math sucks. Yeah, so there are two schools of thought, right? One is learn all this theory, learn all these things, and be able to figure stuff out as you go. And the other is I'm playing music, not solving a math equation or something. So a lot of people that just learn what these things sound like by ear, and they learn the geometry on the fingerboard, which is why I was showing you a couple of ways. Like look at what frets I'm playing, look at the way my fingers are laid out on there. So for visual learners, that might help a lot because those patterns get moved around. And if you know what patterns to move around on, then you can kind of hear what key you're in and kind of stumble upon it to figure that out. But some people need to think more analytically about it, and other people thinking analytically about it will drive them crazy. So it's just better to play a bunch of music and kind of comes naturally. So there are different kinds of learners. I don't think there's anything wrong with learning theory. For me, it helped a lot. So it helps me make sense of things and switch between things quickly and whatnot. There's sometimes though where I think you can get over analytical, and it's better to just kind of use your ear and kind of go with that, depending on what kind of player you are and depending on where you are in your musical journey. So that being said, any final questions? It doesn't have to be related to this, just anything U-bass related or bass related or music theory related. Let me know, and otherwise I'm about to call it. So just let me know what helps. And I think of theory, by the way, Seth, I like that you said theory helped you too. It's a way to like bridge the gap for those of us where our ear is impeccable, right? If we don't have perfect pitch, if we're not just super duper insane, then it's almost like theory is a way to bridge the gaps that our ear won't cover, or that we can hear, but our brains don't go to the right note on the fingerboard, fretboard because of that. And then just kind of realizing there's a logic behind most music, and a lot of times that logic goes along with this theory, at least in Western music. It goes off of this particular theory, unless you get into atonal stuff, in which case it's probably like, I almost think of atonal stuff and free jazz and some other things like that as almost a retaliation against how organized this theory and our just whole concept of music is. And it's kind of like freeing to get away from that. And so a lot of times I think the reason that free jazz exists, for instance, in atonal music, is because people were kind of retaliating against it, like saying, we don't want to confine our ears to the system of learning, this music theory, this system of learning. We want to like break all the rules, but it's kind of like you have to know what the rules are to break them. So I think that free jazz and atonal music made by people that have gone through and learned all the theory is probably going to exist better because there's still some sort of organization to the way that somebody thinks. And, it's kind of like you're going to be more limited and actually find yourself falling into systems just based off of what you've heard before, that I almost feel like free jazz by somebody that doesn't understand theory is probably more boring because you don't know how to break the rules, and so your ear might accidentally fall into some. Your finger patterns might just be based on like your anatomy and stuff, and it might actually be more predictable rather than less predictable, which is kind of an interesting thing too. But I don't know why I got on that tangent. I think it's just because Seth's on here. Okay, so Seth says, for me, theory was more of answering the why questions of music. So now that I understand how that works, I can take that and go with it. Yeah, so the why is just a way to organize it in our brains. So for me, having that why allows me to learn songs, knowing that most of them follow some of this theory, whether it's arpeggios and chords, and it's built off of those building blocks. Then that way, when I hear stuff, I've trained my ear to be able to pick out the theory stuff that I have in the songs. My brain can chunk it down into groups. So if I have to learn a whole bunch of songs at once, it's easier to say, oh, these songs are using these chords, these progressions, and then I can just kind of learn a bunch of stuff at once. So like it's kind of necessary. If you have 40 songs to learn and you have a week to do it, you're not going to be able to go in and learn every single individual note to every single song without driving yourself mad, right? You can do it. I'm sure there are some people that can do it. You have to have a really good memory to do it. But sometimes it's better to just have these little groupings there and go, the song will sound good if I apply this theory to this. So if I know it's a root fifth style line, and in general, just from listening to it, and then I go, okay, and I know I'm outlining these chords. I may not do the walk-ups and stuff, in the same places, but if I know it's a country style line, I know it's going to have walk-ups in certain places, and I'm going to use the context of the song to decide when it feels right to do it. So, and if it doesn't, then just sticking to simplicity. But that's kind of a more practical thing, is like using theory to chunk down these giant songs into little pieces. So knowing song form helps. Understanding chords helps, even if you're not going to play chords on the bass. Just the knowledge of it helps. And just understanding certain stylistic things that are pretty much the same in almost every song in a particular genre. And of course, there are exceptions. So don't get me wrong about there like not being exceptions. But blues, knowing the 12-bar blues, and knowing that there are a bunch of songs that are 12-bar blueses, for instance, knowing that they're comprised of, generally speaking, dominant seventh chords, unless it's a minor blues song. Just having this knowledge really just kind of helps you organize what you're learning. And sometimes when you can organize what you're learning, you retain it better. So for me, a lot of the songs that I remember, if I can remember the chord progression and the general feel of the song, then I don't need to kind of stress myself over having every single note correctly, unless it's like a bass line that's very essential to the song, in which case you just play it until you memorize it is the best way there. But you don't always have that luxury of time. Okay. Seth says, why certain patterns work, why certain notes work well together, why certain chords sound good together, etc. Yeah, so Seth, that's all true based on Western theory. You might decide that different notes sound good based on, you can get into the philosophy of this, right? It's kind of cool. That what we think sounds good is a rich history of music, and it's like everything is built off of some core things. Some of it is built off of science and math, because like there is the harmonic spectrum where it's just like those are the overtone series, that happens in notes. So it kind of makes sense that they kind of spell a chord, root, fifth, octave, third. So it's like a major chord is kind of within that overtone series, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, I mean, there is some science behind it that makes certain things more pleasing to the ear in general. But if you grew up in a place where that dissonant sound kind of mimicked the environment, you might feel like you like a certain sound better than that. But it's like getting philosophical on it or something. I don't think that's what you guys came here today for, the philosophy of all this craziness. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I hope you have an excellent week. I will have a video for you on Tuesday and then another video on Thursday. And I hope you have a great time till then, a great half week or whatever that ends up being, a great week. And have fun playing these chords, and always let me know if you have any questions in the comments. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.